Greetings, Internet! Welcome to yet another fun-filled episode of the Comic Watchers Show. This is Nicholas Osborne, that's Mighty Mike Eakins, and I am your host, Matt Meyer. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are honored to have with us this very week Sean Lewis, author of Bliss from Image, and coming soon, co-author of King Spawn from Image, the first new Spawn #1 in nearly 3 decades. Sean, welcome to the show. How the heck are you, buddy?
I'm good, man. I'm really good. Thanks for having me. It's been a very surreal year, let alone month. So fun to share it with some folks.
I feel you, man. We're coming out of our COVID years. Things are slowly getting back to a new kind of normal. I like to check in on our guests. Are you okay? Are your family members okay?
Yeah,
everybody hearty and healthy, I hope.
We've been good. My wife is also a writer. She's a novelist, so we're very quiet, just hide in different parts.
Oh, okay, yeah. You're a shut in anyway. So
yeah,
like,
I felt bad. I had a lot of friends who were just like, I just don't know how to do this. Like, how are you guys holding up? And I was like, this is our day-to-day life, like regularly. Unfortunate. I'm sorry, but that's just what it is for us.
It's like an introvert's dream,
right? We talked to quite a few creators.
The last year and a half, like if you were an introvert, it's just game on.
It worked. It definitely worked out. If you looked around, you're just like, you've all become my people.
Yes. Now go away.
I always say, like, I sort of love how many creators we've talked to who are just like, it's kind of been business as usual for me here, just like watching the world outside sort of go crazy while we're in here making comics and talking about comics. Like,
it's true. There's definite moments of being like guilt ridden. There's definitely like friends I'll talk to who are like really struggling with it. But inside you're kind of going like, they're like, what about you? Like, how are you doing this? I'm like, job wise, it's the exact same way it's been for me for like ever. I get emails from artists, I send them back, and like that's kind of how it all gets made now. But yeah.
Oh, awesome. Well, I wanna go ahead and kick off with a little bit of King Spawn talk. Nick is just about the biggest Spawn nerd you've ever met, so I'm going to let him jump in with the first line of questions / interrogation / fanboy gushing.
Yeah, let me try to just like gloss over a half hour of fanboying out that we're sitting here with a co-author of like bringing to life the Spawn universe. Right. I mean, this is such an epic moment. There's so many things happening with Spawn right now, right? I mean, Todd McFarlane's pushing for that live action movie with Jamie Foxx. There's, talks of some animated works. The comics are selling more than they ever have, arguably. I mean, I think Spawn's Universe #1 topped over 200,000 units. Crazy time. You've got the Guinness World Record with Spawn 300. And I think we're looking to capitalize on that kind of resurge popularity for Spawn. And we've got a lot of creators coming involved with some pretty exciting projects, and one of those is King Spawn. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with it and sort of your own experience with Spawn?
Yeah, experience with Spawn, like I bought issue 1.
Yeah.
I just remember my dad used to like he worked on houses, and like he used to basically trick me when I was like 10, 11 years. Not trick me, but he'd be like, come help me like roof a house, and I'll buy you a couple of comic books afterwards. And Spawn was one of them that I got on one of those trips. I remember because he made comments. He was like, what the hell is this? Like, this looks evil.
Lots of dads and moms in the 90s, the early 90s said that.
Yeah, I just remember him saying this looks evil, and that's staying with me like forever. I knew the book really well from that point. And then it was really kind of odd. Todd and I started working on a separate project together that I'm sure people will hear about soon. And through that, he ended up reading this comic book I had written called Thumbs. And he was like, I got these phone calls, and, it was quarantine, and I would just get these calls. Right. I hadn't like talked to him really. Like he has a bigger company. So I worked with some people in the company. And there was just one day the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was like, hey, Sean, Todd McFarlane, what are you doing? I was like, nothing now.
Like, I'm too busy to talk. No, this is not how that works.
I'm definitely And we had this long talk, and he started telling me, he was like, just had Spawn 300, looking to expand the universe. You ever think about Spawn? And I was like, sure, I know the book. And it started out with him kind of just asking, like, do you have any ideas about it? I did not. There was a part of me deep down that was like, am I being approached to like work on it? But I wasn't sure, and I was not brave enough to ask. Honestly, for like 2 or 3 months, Todd and I would have these phone calls that were like marathons. They'd be like a 2-hour-long marathon of us just throwing story ideas back and forth. It was so fun, where it'd be like, it's just me and Todd. Literally, he's like, "Well, what happens if it explodes? Like, what would you do?" And I'm like, this can happen. Maybe there's an angel. Or what about the Bible? How does it interact with the Bible? Like, and we just go on these long rants together. And I would get off the phone, and my wife would be like, Are you working on this book? And I'd be like, I have no idea. I have no clue what's going on. But I'm having a good time. So, it doesn't matter. And then, I think we probably started having those conversations in like October. And then maybe right before Thanksgiving, I feel like he called and we had one of those conversations. And he said something along the lines. He was like, "Yeah, I'm thinking the Conan book. Like, it's like a King Conan. Like, if you think Conan, like it'll be King Spawn. That's the book you'll work on." And then he kept talking, and I was like, 1 second. What do we mean? That's the book I'm going to work on. He was like, "What do you think we've been talking about all this time?"
Way to bury the lead, Todd.
Right? So, I did a little silent dance. I was like, I know. I knew that. Let's keep and then at that point, I think he started sending me some art by Javier Fernandez, who's doing the art on King Spawn. Mm-hmm. And that stuff was incredible. He had a bunch of these. He was sending me like Instagram photos that Javi had done on his own of like some really gothic Batman stuff. Yeah. And Todd was just kind of like, I feel like the book should feel like this. And I was just like, yeah, man, this feels cool. And so then we started, based off the conversations I had had with Todd, I started, breaking down what a first arc would look like, the traditional book. And then me and Javi started working together. And then that's been its own animal. He's amazing. So that's been super fun and has informed me as much as anything. Because there's pages Javi turns in and I go like, oh, we can go there. There's some horror stuff he can do and gothic thriller like stuff he can do that it just immediately I was like, oh, okay. Like if you can do that, then let's play with that. Let's play with that a good amount. So that's been it's been pretty more organic than I would expect. But pretty organic getting to the point where we're like ready to put the first launch of it out.
Right. I love that, really. And that's sort of kind of the big deal about what Spawn is doing right now in the growing, expanding universe that McFarlane kind of reached out about. So we've got, Spawn is going to hold down the ongoing series. There's still going to be just a Spawn comic. I doubt that's going anywhere anytime soon. But the expansion of the universe, we're going to have King Spawn, Gunslinger Spawn, which is such a fan favorite, and then The Scorch, which is kind of like a team-up book. So where does King Spawn find itself in this lineup and in this expansion of the universe?
I think it's there's a level of super heroics and fighting monsters on a regular basis and really generating the universe as a whole happening in the traditional Spawn book right now, right? Like it's been introducing all those characters. It's been bringing like these new villains in and really setting the table. And I think I feel like tonally it's going to keep moving in that vein. King Spawn has been kind of moving in a much more personal direction. Like part of what I was really fascinated was like, who's Al? Like at this point in the world, like who's Al Simmons? Who are his friends? Is there such thing as friendship in the Spawn universe? Probably not. What does that even like look like? And like I went back and I started reading really obsessively some older books to get ready for it. Like I was reading a lot of like Jamie Delfano's Hellblazer book. I was looking at a lot. I really obsessively was reading Punisher Max and Punisher Born by Garth Ennis.
Right.
And I was going a lot through Frank Miller's Daredevil and Dark Knight runs. Because for me, there's like a really amazing balance between this like kind of gothic superhero world, but a very grounded, gritty, dirty realism. And so like, it's kind of in my mind, like if the Safdie brothers directed a horror movie.
Whoa.
That's kind of like what I'm shooting for, is that like there's like this kind of like energetic, propulsive grittiness happening at all times. And getting to see Al, like really getting to see Al and how he deals with the teammates when they're out of costume, how he deals with people from his past showing up, in the ways that I was really fascinated with how Frank Castle and Matt Murdock do in the separate Daredevil and Punisher books.
Right.
But then the flip of it is I was like, when we get into the action, when we get into Spawn, like really the juxtaposition of those two worlds, it became really fun for me of like, when we get into Spawn, this like God of vengeance, like how far can we go with that?
Yes.
And what does that mean? And like some of my favorite Spawn, I should say also, one of the things I was reading really obsessively is Todd's entire arc with Jason Shaw and Alexander that happened in Japan. That had like these great horror elements, and like there's the girl who like is waving limbs at people. Like,
yeah.
It's like one of my favorite runs. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So I went back and read that. I was reading that a lot along with the other things, and just kind of going like, what are those like weird personal horror touches that I love about Spawn that we can really go into? What are some like horror action sequences that let Javi show stuff that I don't know if people are ready for? Like, there's stuff in issue 3. I just got issue 3. There's stuff in issue 3. There's definitely two splash wheel pages that are like insane, but he has a double page spread in that's an action sequence that I just think people are going to lose their mind at. Like, it's just so cool. And it's been a lot of me getting into the mythology. Like, I've been really fascinated with like, it's gonna be a weird sentence, but like, I've been really fascinated with Spawn's relationship to his chains.
Yes.
Like, and the chains and the cape. When those things, because this, it's not really an armor. He wears a skin.
Yeah.
And the chains are part of it. And so I've been kind of thinking a lot about like the chains as an expansion of skin, and like what it means if there's a level of touch and feel in all of these items that he kills with. Like, what does that mean for his safety, but also like just an extension and expansion of where he's been. What is that? Right. And I've also been really obsessed with like, the book's called King Spawn, and I've been thinking a lot about like, what is a king to somebody who follows no one and wants no followers?
Exactly. That's the big thing, right? Because that's Spawn. So what does it mean for Spawn to be a king? Because the first question is, a king of what? That's
like the huge exploration of the book right now.
Right.
He used to be king of the homeless people.
There's a particular alley he could be king of. I mean,
you can phone Capullo and get him over in a heartbeat to help revive that, I'm sure.
It's very true, but it's a great question, and I think even to what you're bringing up in terms of the homeless people in the past, like one thing I've been super interested in is like, there's still characters in a lot of that world building that is my first introduction to the character. And so there's a lot of older things that are coming back in new ways. Like, there's a lot of things that I was obsessed with in the first like 20 to 30 issues of the book that I'm like, what happens if he shows up? What happens if that place shows up? What if Al has to go back there? Like, what does it mean? It's been fun. I thought I was a little scared of the job at first, but excited to do it, to be fully honest. But it's been way, way more fun than I expected, which I thought it would be fun, but it's kind of exceeded my expectations.
Right. I definitely understand. And I have one more and then I'll turn it over to Scoop, who I know is all about Bliss, and I know we're getting there. But with this expansion, I can't help but ask, with your conversations with Todd and kind of feeling out this expansion of the universe, of course, everybody looks at the sales and the new movie happening and maybe a Sam and Twitch series. A lot of this as like, of course, you're expanding the comics and that's what you're doing. What is the vibe you get from Todd on, why this expansion is happening now and what it means for the industry right now?
I think he's always wanted to do it, to be fully honest. I think that gets talked about less. Like in actual conversation with him, we don't really talk about the movie stuff or even the sales stuff. I think the sales stuff and the renewed interest at 300, my best guess is it gave Todd, I think Todd's pretty amazing. Like talking to him is like a constant business and comics education. Like that part's been insane. Like he's a total whirlwind. There's a lot of times where I'm talking to him and I imagine him and Rob Liefeld in their 20s in the same room. And I'm like, I don't know what the hell that would be like. Like it would be so many ideas at once. It would be dizzying. Right. But I think very sincerely, this is something I think from the moment he left in 92 that I think he wanted to do. And I think that 300 and the interest that people had suddenly made it possible in a new way, right? Like where he started going like, I do have a bunch of new characters and people do really like Gunslinger and he really loves Gunslinger. Like, no question. But I think for him, it became suddenly like, how big could I go if I tried this right now? And I think the response of the fans has been crazy. Like, it's been, I mean, from the inside, I was about to say from the outside, but from the inside, it's been so intriguing. Like, just seeing the amount of response to every piece of art that goes up or every announcement. Seeing so many fans who are like, I haven't read Spawn in years. I can't wait to read all of the books.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just look at that and I'm like, this is going to be cool. Like, I don't know what it's going to be in the end, but I'm like, it's going to be pretty cool. I've also seen a lot of the art and story for some of the other books, and I'm like, I know it's starting off really cool.
Right? Well, we're excited for sure. I know it's going to be big and epic.
Oh, absolutely.
And we're just really excited for it.
I'm glad. I'm glad to hear it. I mean, me too. It's also kind of unprecedented. Most of my career has been at Image. The first book I did was at Image, and primarily I've worked there. And they've always given me a platform, which has been amazing. And it's so crazy to work with one of the guys who created that possibility.
Sure.
And it's also cool to see him. I guess the big thing is I'm like, he's been doing this for so long and he's still chasing the dream. And I'm like, man, if that's the only lesson a lot of us creators and readers get from it, I'm like, that's dope. Like just the fact that it's like 30 years in, it's like, no, I still have pretty big dreams and ambitions and I'm going to try. And people might think it'll fail and I don't care. And I'm like, I don't know. I look at that a lot of the time and I'm like, fuck yeah, man. Like,
right.
I'm hoping,
awesome. Nice.
I'm hoping in 20 years I'm still doing this, but I'm also doing it in the way where I'm still taking big risks and going like, yeah, everyone might think I'm a fucking idiot for doing this, but I think it's cool. I think it's risky. I think it's fun.
Right.
Anything I look at that and I'm like, man, that's dope. I'm so excited you're doing this.
Yes.
Spawn hits stores August 11th?
You got
if
it.
I'm not mistaken.
August 11th. Absolutely.
Awesome. And of course, Spawn's Universe just shipped week before last. So this is a very, very good time to be a Spawn reader, both new and old. Hint. So that's King Spawn. So let's move on to Bliss, which just concluded last month, also at Image Comics, 8-issue miniseries. Sean, for those who are not in the know on the coolness that is Bliss, please, what's it about?
It's one of the hardest comic books in the world to describe, which I think does not help with sales-wise. But I think the easiest I can say is it's a father-son story about forgiveness and addiction centered around a world where a goddess named Leth has made a drug that makes people's memories go away. And the father gets hired to be the enforcer of the drug. And the son has to learn, is he going to forgive his dad for what he did to save his life, or does he hold that against him? And that's like the most succinct way I think I can try to encapsulate that weird book.
I think that's a good elevator pitch.
Yeah.
Mike, you've been dead silent for 20 minutes now, buddy, but the spotlight is yours. Don't fuck it up.
Yeah, so right, don't fucking no nerves, right? No, just it's only live. No, Sean, when I first started reading Bliss, I don't want to say like I was like duped, but I was like, oh, it's mythology, it's great, there's Laith, and it's great. And then as the series went on, you started to get into the more deeper themes of the book, and with what families deal with throughout. How did the concept of this come out? The mixing mythology with real world situations that are when folks read this, they're gonna. Everyone's gonna feel different about it, but I'm sure you're gonna hit the ones and twos where someone just kind of just falls in line and like, wow, that's my story, or that's my friend's story, or something like that.
I mean, kind of by accident, to be honest. Kate and I, Caitlin Yarsky, who's the amazing artist on it, we had just finished a book called Coyotes together, and we knew we wanted to work together again. And we were throwing around ideas. She travels a lot when she works. Like she'll go to Thailand or Amsterdam and send me art from there, and I'll be jealous. Like that's a lot of our work.
What a tough life.
We started out talking about like medicine and hospital bills and things like that, like going to other countries to take care of health insurance, but we couldn't figure out what that was. Right. And then at one point we had a Twitter direct message conversation, and we were both just like, we weren't even really talking about the book. We were kind of just complaining about the world. And we were like, how do some people like live with themselves when they do horrible things? And she said that, and I was like, maybe that's the book, man. Like, that's an interesting idea, like that general sentence. And I was like, well, maybe we'll have a drug that wipes away people's memories when they do something bad. And she was like, oh, that's cool. That's cool. And then the next part, honestly, was me going like, what do you want to draw? And she was like, I really want to draw like toads and like turtles and like sea monsters. I was like, okay. Sure, let's do that. I think it's I come from theater, so it's a lot of like just saying yes, right. A lot improv theater, which is not my main background, but the whole idea of like, instead of me shutting down saying no, let's say yes and see where it goes. And knowing her art, I was like, she's gonna make that amazing. So then for me, it just became a game of like, okay, what we then have is like this mix of a Breaking Bad kind of drug story, unsuspecting drug story, with like American Gods or like a Neil Gaiman type fantasy. And that was the basic stuff.
Right.
The big thing that was missing was I did not expect the book to get as personal to my own life as it ended up getting. That was never the plan. That was way far from the plan. And I started writing the first couple of issues, and I was like, oh, that's funny. Like the first issue, I was like, yeah, I see a little bit of me in Perry. That's strange. And then issue 2, I was like, yeah, it does feel a little bit, but it doesn't feel that personal. I think by issue 3 or 4, I was like, fuck, I'm writing me. And I didn't fully know that was going to happen.
Are you telling us that your father is a serial killer?
I'm not going to say he's a serial killer.
We just get it out there.
He's no longer with us. He was not a great guy. Okay. He was a very complicated guy, but falling very much morally on a bad space. And I think I've spent a lot of my life, I have a young son now, thinking a lot, like sometimes my son asks me about it. My stepdad is not my actual dad, and he's 5, so he gets confused by that. He'll be like, what's your real dad? I'm like, oh, my real dad's dead. And he'll be like, oh, was he cool? And I'm like, not really. Like, it's a complicated question. And so that started informing a lot. He wrestled with addiction a lot, and was a very, very absent and would do very violent, not necessarily, well, sometimes physically violent, but very often like emotionally violent things. But the thing that was complicated about it, and that I think informed Bliss in an interesting way, was like, he often did emotionally violent things when he was actually trying to like help. or make something better, or it was like this weird disconnect of how to do it. And so he would do a thing and you'd be like, that like hurt everybody around you. And he'd be like, yeah, but I was really trying to make you happy. And you're like, this is such a strange way of going about it, you know? And so really by the second arc of Bliss, that started to inform a lot of it. I mean, part of what was going on at the same time was my wife and I had a weird scare with our son's health in the pandemic. Like there was, not to get too far into it, but we had a pretty big scare that ended up turning out fine. But because of the pandemic, we couldn't go and get things checked, right? Like we couldn't actually go to see the specialist or get a second opinion. So we were stuck for a long stretch of it, just going like, I don't know if he's okay, right? Like we just don't know. And so I was just kind of obsessively thinking about him and thinking about my dad and thinking about all of those things, which then played into, I think, when you ask about like how the groundedness came into it. Like it started with me thinking I was writing a big story. You know, Coyotes was a big mythic story. It had some grounding, but more it was more fantastical across the board. Where Bliss kept getting started off really big and epic and kept getting more and more grounded as it kind of went along, I think. Right. Sorry, it's a long range.
Even the goddess at the end, Lathe, you know, is feeling human like emotions. So yeah, I can definitely see that.
Yeah, and I think that was also a part. I mean, there's also challenges I put in for myself a lot of times. Like, probably not the best way to do your own books, but I usually don't get very excited about a book I'm working on until I think it could fail really bad. That like if I take a misstep somewhere along one of the issues, this is going to be like embarrassingly bad. And like that was part of Bliss because, you know, it's juggling. It's doing a lot of things that are hard. Like you're juggling not only timelines but realities. Like we're jumping back and forth, present to past constantly, like in the issues, and trying to keep the momentum of a story going forward when you're constantly flashing back is hard. But then it's also like, well, we're also going to have a grounded reality where we're like at a farm. And then I'm going to introduce this like snake god, you know, like in the next page. And for me, it was like, well, this could be really embarrassing and I could ruin things for Kate and I, or this will be something special to me at least. And so that became also part of the wrestling match was like, there's a lot of me in it. And now how do we keep all these balls in the air? And I think going to the point of like, even the goddess becoming more human was just kind of trying to get to that thematic base of like, what if everyone needs to forgive someone else and everyone needs to forgive themselves, right? Like, what if every character in the book is wrestling with that? And that started becoming the overwhelming kind of engine of the book.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That was great. I wondered because at first the book was gonna get in a trade, but then it came back onto press and everything. Was that because of like, was that more pandemic, or was it just like, well, okay, you know, the pandemic started to, you know, not to say over, but you know, everything was starting to kind of get the wheels turning again, so to speak.
It was a little bit pandemic and a little bit miscommunication, to be honest. Is when we did Coyotes, we did two trades that were small trades, right? That they were the first 4 issues, so they'd be like 80-page trades. And so when we first, basically what happened is when we first started talking to Image about it, I think I had mentioned the 2 trades, and somewhere along the lines it got confused, and the idea and there had turned to like we should do it as one big classic trade. It just got caught late. Honestly, it's like we were already planning on the second trade, going on the 2 trade idea, and then it was like we shouldn't do that. It'll financially be bad, and also we think the book will be better as a single trade. And then that's when it pivoted. So sometimes that's as much. I mean, part of it was pandemic because the pandemic sometimes made communication hard. To be honest,
no, it made everything harder. You know,
yeah, it was horrible. We were also a lot of times trying to figure out what was going on because every month it was like, does Diamond exist? Are they shipping things? Is this happening? And as a creator, where like an Image, you're kind of co-managing the book with them. You're like, what does this mean? And a lot of times women was even like, we're not sure. Like we're figuring out in real time what this all means. So some of that just like what it would end up doing is it would just basically push like printing time. It would move timelines around in ways where then the emails of communication for things would get a little bit lost. And then you're like, oh, we can't do 2 trades. We didn't realize that. So we're going to do the one. I will be honest though, at the time I was a little bit like, man, I really want to do the 2 for selfish reasons, is it gives you a break. It gives you a very, it gives you a break, but keeps you in the market, right? Like it keeps a book out while you're like, we're taking 3 months off.
Right.
So it was hard to leave that, but I'm really excited to have the full trade in my hand. Now that I've finished the story and I know like how it's going to read, I'm like, I think the single trade is going to read in a really cool way for people. And also they've done the design work that they've done on it. I'm like, that's cool. So that's also where I'm like they've used all of Kate's to become like Tolkien-esque chapter breaks. And have added some like lithograph pages to separate.
Oh wow,
it's really pretty. So I'm like, I don't know. When I was looking through it, I was
cool.
like,
yeah.
So I'm interested kind of in the idea of bliss itself, a drug that makes you forget. And obviously there are lots of real world correlatives to this, but this isn't the story about Walter White, this manufacturing bliss or anything like that. This is a story about somebody that's under its influence, and at this, I mean, it's all just very different in terms of what you might expect if you heard the elevator pitch that you gave earlier. What went into the process of formulating this world, this dynamic between Bliss and Denton, and Percy, and I mean all of the victims, and the gods. Like, there's a lot of interesting world building going on here. Like Docktown, these gods just hang out down there, and I just really thought that was fascinating. I'd love to hear some insight as to how you came by all this.
Sure. I mean, I knew the moment that Kate told me she wanted to draw, like amphibians. For basically that I was like, they're going to be gods in this. They're going to be big. But I also I personally was kind of fascinated by the idea of what if no one's thrown by them? Like, what if I haven't seen a lot of stories where like you can have like a 8-foot tall turtle god, and when he shows up, people are just like, that guy.
What's up, dude? Yeah.
Which I kind of does. I mean, for me, sometimes it's just looking at the trope or the thing I've seen before and just starting to ask, is there any mileage in doing the opposite of that? Like what happens? And for me, it became kind of interesting of a world that accepts its villains, that accepts like this darker part of its world, and just going like, yeah, we know that exists. It doesn't phase us in a way that it would a normal person, but we also don't think it's good, which I think is kind of like our world. I think there's things like that actually ground the book in a sneaky way, where you go, oh, there's a bunch of like monsters that are in the dark that everyone knows is there, and they just pretend aren't there. I'm like, feels like the last 3 years of like, you mentioned Twitter. I'm like, it feels like Twitter for 3 years. And I think in terms
of a whole other podcast, man, a whole other serious podcast.
For sure.
R-rated political theater.
But in the Benton stuff very much came from my dad, as it became a lot about addiction. He was an alcoholic, and it made me think a lot about the way that he was an alcoholic, and I had a close friend who was a heroin addict, and with both of them, it got me into this. It was a way for me to connect personally with the story in thinking about like memories disappearing to the degree that you literally don't know they're there, that someone can grab you and go, like, you literally hit me yesterday. And they're like, oh, that doesn't sound like me. I don't feel like that's a real thing. And you're like, it's a real thing. And so like that became it. But honestly, like, I think the world building for me at the biggest degree usually happens out of theme. And the moment I knew I was writing about forgiveness and whether it's something people should get or not get, it built a lot more of the world. That's where I was like, okay, we're at a court. Got to be at a court. We're actually going to be on trial for this. And we're going to meet victims. And if we're going to meet victims, I want a lot of victims. Like I remember telling Kate, she went beyond even what I thought. I was like, it's just like the courtroom's full of victims. And then she showed me the court. I'm like, that is a courtroom. That is the biggest courtroom I've ever seen. But I loved it, like the expanse of it, and like how do you make up for something that emotionally or even literally is that big, and how does the family forgive it? Became a lot of how that world building would work. It a lot for me was just like, there's a monster inside of Benton that he knows is there, and everyone around him ignores it. There's this. One of my favorite scenes is in like, I think the second issue, he's just sitting on a stoop with his wife, and Mabel's kind of like, are you just going to keep lying to me? Like, we all know that you're up to bullshit.
Yeah.
And that's so many members of my family are like, which is basically like saying like, we all know that you're either doing monstrous shit or there's a monster in you. So are we dealing with it tonight, or are we all just going to sit on the stoop and pretend that we're normal? Most of the times you sit on the stoop and pretend you're normal.
Right. We lie to ourselves. It's easier.
Constantly.
Yeah.
And so that became a big part of it for me, of like, if we're dealing with forgiveness, I think a lot of times, we make very, sometimes with I get very fascinated with how a lot of times with words, we get so used to hearing them that we go with their most obvious definition or simple definition.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've been teaching a storytelling class at a college, and I'll often start by just asking like, what's a story? And they're all like, a story is, like, it's like a movie. I'm like, that's not necessarily like, what is a story? Just let's get like, if we break it down. And for me, it became, me personally asking myself, like, what is forgiveness? Is it saying I'm sorry and someone saying, I understand that and I absolve you? Is it absolution? Is it a community moving forward even if it's not absolved? Is it like, what exactly does it mean?
Well, and you just hit on some of the but
I think we're losing Matt for just a second.
I think I lost you.
Oh, are you there? Am I back?
Okay, let's start that over, Matt.
Yeah, you're back. Okay, yeah. Sorry, guys. Apparently the connection issues are on my side. So there it goes again. Sean, you just hit upon some of the thorny moral and philosophical things that I was hoping to segue towards, with regards to, Percy knows who his father is. Percy knows that deep down he's a good side, but at the same time, society knows that his father has done this monstrous shit, to use your terminology.
Right.
And it's an interesting discussion to be had. Is Percy allowed, in the face of all this monstrousness, to still forgive and even love his father? Did you just sit down and study some Plato and Socrates to come to all of this heady stuff, or did it all just kind of organically happen?
I mean, I'm a often lapse, sometimes go back Catholic, right? Like I veer between Catholicism and atheism on a daily basis. So I think some of those,
like most,
I think some of those moral questions are just built into me, like for who I just like my upbringing, and I think about that stuff a lot. But I also have a young kid who, it's hard. It's so cliche, but I just look at him all the time and think of the world he's growing up in and the life he's going to live. And I'm like, what is forgiveness for you and your generation is like a interesting question to me. And I don't know the answer. I mean, the hard thing about it is it is thorny in the sense that I don't know that anyone knows the answer, right? Like, do you just absolve people? Like when people do horrible things, like a lot of them get off with it. I think what's most difficult about it is it's this thing we want to be universal and yet can't seem to really be. Like it's almost always personal. Like whether if for any of us in this room, if someone does something really horrible to us, if someone does something really horrible to me, my wife will never forgive them. Like just never. Like it's never going to work out. And there's times where I've forgiven people, like former friends, and my wife will be like, why do you deal with them? Like they've hurt you so many times. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not hurt the way you are watching it from the outside. She's like, there's no justice to this if you let them just like walk all over you. And I'm like, I feel better that I've actually reached out to them, and I want to believe they will be better. I might get bit fucking again. Like, it might happen. But I'm willing to live in that world. For me, there's also times where I see people hurt my wife, and I have the same response. I'm like, that person's not a friend. Like, fuck them. You know, and she'll be like, I've known her longer than anyone in my life. And I'm like, that means it's a mistake that's been going on way too long. You know? Yeah. But I think that's the hard thing. I mean, you mentioned Twitter, but we live in a very weird moment where technology demands us to have an opinion. Like, our technology demands us almost to receive information, formulate a definitive opinion, and voice the opinion, make a judgment, and voice that judgment and opinion within seconds.
Yeah.
I don't live in a world that's that clear. There's a lot of times where I'm like, maybe I'm a bad person, because I'm like, I'm not making a judgment right now. I don't know what the fuck's going on.
Right.
You know, or I'm making a judgment and I'm keeping it to myself. Sometimes maybe I'll make a judgment, but it's tough, man. Like, I grew up in the generation of Judge Dredd. I don't want to be. I understood what that book was about. There's a lot of people who read Judge Dredd who don't understand what that book's about. But like, I've never wanted to be the judge and the executioner. Right. Like, I read Punisher and I get his moral gray lines. I'm entertained by him without agreeing with him. You know, and like, that gets very dicey. Yeah. It's a tough one. And I know the book is a tough one for people in that way. I know when it first came out, there was some people that I know who reached out to me. And they're like, what exactly you're saying with this book? And it was tough because I was like, I'm not sure. Like, it's going to explore all of it. Like, they were like, but even the victims. I'm like, trust me, I already know where the book goes. The victims are coming back full force. It's just not going to be when you expect it, or maybe the way you thought it would be. Unfortunately, you're going to love Benton when they show up. Because I think that's the time to have the conversation. I think it's so easy to have a conversation when you don't know somebody or you hate somebody already, to go, like that person should be decimated. I think it's harder when you're like, that's a person I love. What do I do about that? Or that's a person I worked in prisons for a while, like doing theater. And it was a really interesting thing. It really changed a lot of my concepts of judgment and rehabilitation and prison, like what justice is. And I remember somebody asked me about it once, because I was working with killers. Like these were people serving life sentences for murder. And they'd be like, aren't you scared? I'm like, day one, I'm always scared, and I don't want to have anything to do with them, and I have a preconceived notion of who they are. By day 10, I know some of them are trying to work me and are full of shit. I really learned to like some of them. I feel bad for some of them. And they were like, well, what's the difference? And I'm like, when you're sitting across from an actual human being who tells you they're trying, it's so hard not to want to help them and or believe them. Even if they're lying, it's really tough. If you're one-on-one with a person going, I did this horrible thing. I've been here since I was 16 years old. I'll never be able to make it up. I just wish I could, to not be like, you seem human to me, not like a monster to me.
Right.
Just always stayed with me. Like those moments in there have always been something. I'm no saint. I've hurt people in my life. I've made people proud. Like, it is the crux of us being people. You know, I mean, I haven't killed people. I haven't done I don't think I've done horrendous things, but like, I can't say like, everyone I've touched has been better for it. I'm like, possibly not, man. Yeah. But when it hasn't been, I have tried my best to like learn from it and make sure the next person is.
Right.
And I don't, and I get, it's tricky. I get tricked up too, because I think like it is the main point and focus of the book. And it's also one of the hardest conversations. It's almost impossible to unpack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is. And I don't want to step on any toes here, but I mean, just talking to you for 45 minutes here, I feel like I know you. You're You're a vulnerable person and open, and I really appreciate that. And it comes through in your writing. We've seen a ton of comments on Bliss about how heartfelt and emotional and how it kind of tugs at you. And even just talking to you for a few minutes, we get that in your personality and how you inject it into your writing, and the dichotomy between judgment and forgiveness, and how that results in vulnerability and how that manifests in the work itself. And there's not a question in here at all. It's really just an observation that is not something that you see a lot in comics. We get caught up in the discussion of this book was made to be adapted into a TV series, and this book is made because it's selling really well. There aren't many books like Bliss where when you get to the end of it, it's hard not to cry because you can feel that vulnerability and that emotional power behind the storytelling. So amazing work. Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Appreciate it. I mean, I think it's interesting. You know, I came to comics really, in my mind, really late. But it's such an amazing form. You know, I talk with Eric Stevenson at Image about this at times. Is like, you know, almost every book I've done at Image has been an odd book in some ways. They've either been like absurdly long or have weird back matter and like typography through them, or they're Bliss. You know, they're usually a little different. And you know he loves it, which is why it's been such a great home for me. But we talk about it at times, and I'm just like, you know, it's an amazing form because it's like super primitive, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that
no, it's elemental.
Yeah, you know, like every one of us had a notebook in like first grade that we would draw pictures in and put our emotions through the picture and a couple of words. Like if I hated my teacher because she yelled at me in front of my friends in second grade, I draw a picture of her like eating carrots and vomiting and like my friends pointing and laughing, right? Like it would be so, and like I would feel better with my friends and they would laugh and we would have this emotional response. And so I'm really interested in that. And I mean, at times it can, like, there's moments with Bliss that are kind of scary because I feel like being vulnerable can be scary. And also because like in our age, I'm like, I'm an imperfect person and I don't want to get yelled at. And I don't want, I'm trying to figure shit out as well, you know, and I think there's other people who are, and it'll help to see that there's someone else also trying to figure out like, what do we do in a situation like we're in. So no, I definitely appreciate that. Yeah.
It's true. I just finished this book. I reread issue 8, and it's hard not to carry that into the conversation because those last pages are intense. And it's awesome to be able to talk to you and see that come through in even just a conversation. It's incredible.
That was definitely the scariest stuff for me to put in the book. You know, it's all heartfelt. You know, it's hard to say like I'm a little bit Benton, I'm a little bit Perry, you know, because you're like, everyone wants to think they're just Perry. And I'm like, I can't do that. I've got some Benton in me too.
And don't we all?
I think we do. It's I think what scares people is we do live in that kind of, I love, you know, do live in that kind of Twitter, social media time where you kind of put up a front of righteousness, or you put up a front of perfection, or you know, and it's like, I mean, it's hardest when you see people who you know are do it, and you're like, I don't know about it. You know, but also in yourself, like the feeling you feel at times of like there's so many times I'm not super active on social media, but I definitely have friends that are like, did you read my tweet? Is it offensive? Or like, should I take it down? I'm like, I don't know, it's 40 characters. I've known you for 10 years. I think it's probably fine without looking at it, but I don't know. But yeah, those pages came in really late. You know, they were, I think like issue 6 is when I knew we were going to do that at the end of the book. Is me and Kate, I talked with Kate. I knew that the last issue was going to come in probably around 15 pages to end the actual story. And I was like, you know, I think I want to do, I was like, I don't know if it's a good idea, but I think I'm going to write this like little coda about me and Eamon and Rick, my dad, Rick. I don't know what it'll be. And she was like, cool, sounds good. And it was, you know, it was really scary, but then like, she was great. She sent like the work in process paintings as she was finishing them with some of the text, and I could see it and kind of show people close to me and go like, am I going too far? It's funny. I became the guy who I'm making fun of about Twitter, as I started handing it to people and going, Am I opening myself up for something? Is this going to hurt? Basically, like, is this going to hurt me? And, you know, people close to me were like, it's you. Like, if it hurts you, it's going to hurt you because it's you.
Yeah.
And that kind of became the, you know, crux of it.
Well, I mean, that's a risk that any creator takes when they fully put themselves out there. There's a level of vulnerability and transparency that, you know, otherwise nobody else would see, but the risk reward is pretty heavy. So, I mean, you know, props to you for being able to put yourself out there like that. I don't think a lot of people could. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I felt like it would. I knew there was a lot in the book. Like, I knew I was asking a lot of readers, and I was just like, I think people will like the book without it. I think it will recontextualize it, though, in a way that I think, like Mike very adeptly said, Mike's review of it made me cry.
So, Mike, good job, buddy.
Which is worth saying. And it's very true. Like, I was like, wow, I can't believe what I made somebody else write about it in this way, which was amazing. Not that I ever imagined. So, I mean, kudos and thank you to you.
Mike's an okay writer.
It definitely for me was just a level of like, maybe this can contextualize everything and kind of like Mike was saying, that it starts out really mythic and then it starts getting more and more grounded in a way that it kind of creates the purposing of that. And which some people, like, I think one of the gratifying things was just seeing, one, how many people on Twitter responded to it. It was very crazy to see people posting pictures of me holding my son. Like, that was amazing. That was weirdly touching, and I did
a little surreal.
Well, from the drawings in the last page, people were just posting the last page. It was just strange to go to Twitter expecting to just scroll through and see people going like, you know, like fuck this politician, basically. And
right.
Seeing like that. But definitely hearing people going like, I really love the book, and then this made me think about it in a totally different way. I was like, okay, Dakota did what I really wanted it. Because your worry is it's going to be like really navel gazing and indulgent, you know, and people read it and just be like, what the fuck is these 4 pages of just like, I had to deal with you for 8 issues. You get another 5 fucking pages. Where it was nice.
I did not feel. I was at that point. I already had tears in my eyes. So I get to this, and I'm like, "Oh fuck, it's getting worse now." Like I needed something to wipe my eyes with, so I can even read this. You know, just outstanding work. And you know, shout out to Mike too, because Mike has been hustling this book behind the scenes at Comic Watch, getting us all to read it, getting us all on board, making sure we knew when the next issue was coming out, and the reviews have been spot on. And it's been really awesome to kind of see that work and what you've put into it, and also the fan reception and that relationship that forms in comics because of that, because that's kind of what keeps us all here.
Yeah, I do love that about it. I think Jimmy Palmiotti was tweeting the other day about like how comics is like a boutique business that's not really as big as people think, which I think some people took as an insult, but I was like, it does allow like this conversation, right?
Right.
And like, it is this amazing like symbiotic relationship. Like, Mike got you guys reading it, but Mike's reviews were also, I feel like, really helpful for me getting people to think about the book, because it would be written eloquently and like, I really love this, and it became a thing that I could then say like, hey, if you haven't taken a chance on it, here's this review and here's this review. Like, it's a different book, but give it an issue or two, and I think it might start. If it's your thing, it'll start working on you. If it's not your thing, then it's fine. There's a lot of other books. You know, and that's, I think, a thing that gets glossed over is like, one, how many of you guys are just doing this out of the love is always amazing to me. Like, the amount of work that you put in to do the podcast and write reviews and tweet about it. And it's like, I don't know, I hope creators appreciate it, but it's a pretty amazing thing. Is like, we have this business that is very strange in that it's omnipresent and only a select few really care about it. Like, that's a fascinating thing, right? Is like you're in all forms of culture, but it's really like this smaller base who are like feverish and have been feverish since a lot of us were kids.
Right.
And I'm like, we need each other. It doesn't actually work without the retailers and the reviewers and the podcast. Like, I don't know. It's
all one big happy family, man.
It's all one big living organism.
Yeah,
you know,
it is.
It doesn't really, in my mind, work without all of those things happening together. You know, and
yeah.
So
I'm for real.
It's 100% for real because I don't see how it would work. As an indie creator who does not do Marvel sales or like huge indie creator sales on my own, there's no way to keep doing books if it doesn't operate this way. And I'm definitely the only one, right? Because your podcast, the difference is like if I do your podcast versus like two people decide to read the book, but they tell another two people, that actually makes a massive difference to how the book does. Right. It might not for some other books or other creators, but for a lot of us, more than us than many admit, it makes a huge difference.
Right.
Well, Sean, books like yours make all the difference, and I mean, frankly, it's love of comics. Is the reason why we do what we do and do this podcast and write our reviews and run the website for free because we love comics as an art form, as a creation, as a force springing forth from creators' minds, like some Greek god kind of a thing happening. And, we do it out of love and to give back to that community. And so, I mean, just, from us to you, hey, we're happy to help. We're happy to be a part of it and happy to give back.
I appreciate it. We definitely appreciate it. Also, I think I mentioned to Mike, like, congrats on the new website design. It looks great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I'm going to go cry now.
Hey, Nick made a lot of that happen. So thank you very much.
Yeah, as we start. No, those are my contacts slipping. I'm not crying.
No, they're not. Laugh.
You are.
We're coming up on our hour, and so Sean, it's just been wonderful having you on the show. Like Nick was saying, you're clearly just such a genuine and transparent person and creator, and you really have made something cool and unique with Bliss. You and Caitlin, I should say. So absolutely. My hat is off to you. The trade comes out, I want to say July 27th.
I think it's
so. If you have not read Bliss, one, you should go to your local comic shop and see what floppies you can get. But if failing that, the trade comes out here at the end of the month, and you should totally hook that up because having that trade, old school style, like Sean said, is pretty awesome too. So with that is our episode for the week. Thank you all so much for listening and bearing with my technical difficulties and silly lag and lack of Wi-Fi on occasion. Sean Lewis, thank you so much for stopping by and hanging out with us. It's really been our pleasure. Nick, Mike, I'll see you guys next week. And everyone listening, listen, just read something cool, support your local comic store, and above all, be kind to each other. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Till next time.
Bye, guys. Thanks.